the good friends, the ones we hold dear, the ones who will tell us what we need to hear, the ones who love us, right or wrong, and to all those good friends that give you this song.
Well, hello, good friends, and welcome back to The Last Walk Remember When, with your host, Ron Baumbach. And we're going back in time again to the fun times, to 1969, when the Mets win the World Series. So get up, get off your easy chair, walk over to your kitchen, get a hot dog steaming hot, put on some sauerkraut and some mustard, get a nice glass of lemonade, go back to your easy chair, turn on your lava lamp, close your eyes, it's storytelling time. The Last Walk is back.
Life is too short, we get only one turn. With luck we find beauty, but we sometimes get burned. But if you've had a true friend, or perhaps love, you've experienced the peace of heaven above.
Let's go, Mets! Let's go, Mets! Let's go, Mets! Let's go, Mets! Let's go, Mets!
Yes, friends, in 1957, as many of you old Brooklyn Dodger and New York Giant fans know, the Dodgers and Giants moved to Chavez Ravine in California and Candlestick Park in San Francisco, leaving New York with a void for National League Baseball. A fellow named Bill Shea and a number of other people worked really hard to bring back baseball. They almost formed a different league, the Continental League, with teams in Houston, New York, and other areas. But Major League Baseball decided against it. They really pushed against the new league, and they gave in. They allowed in 1961 new teams open up in Los Angeles, the Los Angeles Angels, and in Washington, D.C., the Washington Senators, replacing the old Washington Senators who had moved to Minnesota to become the Minnesota Twins. And in 1962, they allowed two new teams in the National League, the Houston Colt 45s, who have since become the Houston Astros, and are now in the American League, ironically enough, and the New York Mets.
Meet the Mets, meet the Mets. Step right up and greet the Mets. Bring your kiddies, bring your wife. Guaranteed to have the time of your life, because the Mets are really socking the ball, knocking those home runs over the wall. East side, west side, everybody's coming down to meet the METS Mets of New York town. Oh, the butcher and the baker and the people on the streets, where do they go? To meet the Mets! Oh, they're hollering and cheering and they're jumping in their seats. Where do they go? To meet the Mets! All the fans are true to the orange and blue, so hurry up and come on down, 'cause we got ourselves a ball club, the Mets of New York town. Give 'em a yell! Give 'em a hand! And let 'em know you're rooting in the stand. Come on and meet the Mets. Meet the Mets. Step right up and greet the Mets. Bring your kiddies, bring your wife. Guaranteed to have the time of your life, because the Mets are really socking the ball, knocking those home runs over the wall. East side, west side, everybody's coming down to meet the METS Mets of New York town, of New York town.
Yes, Meet the Mets, the great song written by Ruth Roberts and Bill Katz in 1961 as part of a contest to pick a theme song for the new team. It was performed by the Glenn Osses Orchestra. I believe some 18 other submissions were put in, and Ruth Roberts and Bill Katz, who wrote the song in '56, I Love Mickey, sung by Teresa Brewer, were the winners. and the rest goes down in history. They did a reversion again in 1975 and again in 84. But it's the classic Meet the Mets.
Let's go Mets! Let's go Mets!
So it is. April the 10th, 1962. Their opening day, their first game back. National League's back in New York. They're going to be in St. Louis against the Cardinals. And guess what? It rained. There was a rain out for the Mets' first game. So they played on April the 11th. And they lost.
Oh, I've been so lucky and I've been so blessed. In spite of my failings, I've found success. For I've known love and I've known good times. And I have known friendship and written some rhymes.
It was a Thursday, April 19th, 1962. I was home from my 7th grade class at St. Aidan's Grammar School in Wilson Park, Long Island, New York. I was on our front porch, a little ledge we had in there where I would fold my newspapers, the Long Island Press. I had a route of some 82 customers. My brother Jerry had 110, I think, on his route. So altogether we had tons of papers. Many days my mom would put our papers together, fold them, but for some reason, that day, that afternoon, I was folding the papers myself. And as I folded them, I read the headlines on the back page. Mets lose again. Now, back then, I wasn't really a big baseball fan. I loved Mickey Mantle. I loved the Yankees back then. Yes, Vanessa, I loved the Yankees. And I was a big fan of, as I mentioned to Mick, he was my all-time hero. But I wasn't really a crazy fan. More a cursory fan. But when Mickey was up, I stopped everything to watch the Mick go to bat. But for some reason, whatever happened that day, as I'm looking at the back headlines of the paper, Mets lose again. It was their 6th in a row. They had never won a game. They started out in April of 1962 in St. Louis, lost that game, and on April 18th, they lost to the Cardinals again, to Al Jackson pitched, who just passed away, and he was like little Alvin. I love that guy. Al Jackson pitched the game, and he lost the game, and I think it was 15-5. And for some reason, I didn't read the headlines, didn't really read sports, except for that day. But that day I started to read the sports pages in the back of the paper. Reading it, going through the press, reading the article, probably Jack Lang wrote the story. And I'm reading the story and I'm saying, this team needs someone to root for them. Every day it seemed it was the same story, another loss. They couldn't even win one game. They lost 9 in a row, their first 9 games they ever played. So I decided then to single-handedly take on the Mets to be my team. They surely needed someone who could put up with their ineptness, their poor play, their buffoonery, and their long look towards the future. I could wait. I had time on my hands. I was only 12 years old. So I decided to make the Mets be my favorite team of all time. And it's been a many year journey, and I'm glad to say I've stayed with the team through thick and thin, many times more thin than thick. I was sort of like my mom, with all her novenas to St. Jude for hopeless cases back then. I took it upon myself to be the one person who could help this team win by being the best fan ever. But it led to a wonderful occasion in October 16th, 1969, when the Mets were on top of the world. They won the World Series. So this show is about the beginning of 1962 to 69, the Mets making it to the World Series.
Let's go Mets! Let's go Mets!
Now, my very first game ever was a game against the Dodgers my dad took me to in the Polo Grounds. It was July 10th, 1963. I recall on the way driving into the Polo Grounds, my dad stopped at some favorite deli he had, maybe in Queens, for his huge hero we had. We shared a huge, massive hero we both got. Then he went to some bakery he knew of, where we had this special pound cake in a brown box. And off we went to the Polo Grounds for my very first ever Met game with my dad. They lost. In fact, the first 9 games I went to, the Mets lost, which is ironic because they lost the first 9 games they ever played. So I felt like we were really linked in together. They lost their first 9 games all time. I lost all the 9 games I went to. And my brother, for some odd reason, Jerry, had been to like 5 or 6 games. Every game he went to, they won. So we decided as teenagers to go together and see what happens. What kind of karma can we create? What kind of team win can we make here? His power versus my power. It turns out the younger brother was stronger. They lost. Over the years, I've been very fortunate to have attended many, many opening days, one of which was in the great season of 1969, when they played the Montreal Expos in their very first game ever. The Expos also played the very last game ever as the Expos against the Mets in 2004. I went to that game too. I think I was the only person in the world, besides maybe some announcers, who was at the very first Expo game and the very last Expo game. But this show's about the Mets, not the Expos. Ironically enough, the Mets lost that opening day in 1969. The 7th year in a row they lost opening day. And I was at a number of them, ironically enough. Since then, the Mets have had an incredible record on winning opening day games. I think the best in baseball. Only the Mets can do things like this. Famous theme song, Meet the Mets, the instrumental version. More to come later. I love that song. It gets me going every spring, every fall, every winter, and every summer. It's my song of summer. In fact, I once wrote my own song, my own theme song for the Mets, which I sent to Ralph Kiner, Bob Murphy, and Lindsey Nelson. What do you think? Oh, we ain't got a barrel of victories, maybe some sorrows and injuries, but we play the game. What's a new player's name? Side by side. I never heard back. I guess my songwriting days were not profound. I did, however, hear back from Ralph Kiner after he wrote his book. I sent him a nice note telling him how wonderful the book was, how much I enjoyed it. And lo and behold, I get a card in the mail from Ralph Kiner thanking me for my kind words. We as Met fans were blessed to have 3 great people, 3 great voices guide us on our journey. Ralph Kiner, Lindsey Nelson, and Bob Murphy. What an incredible trio of voices who guided us on our TV and radio performances all those years. I think it was 17 years they worked together. And over the years, we've had quite a collection of people announcing our games. From Fran Healy to Tom Seaver, to Steve Zabriskie, to Gary Thorne, and of course, Tim McCarver. What a collection of voices called our games. And now we have Gary, Ron, and Keith on TV, and Howie on the radio. You can't ask for better than this.
Oh, I've been so lucky and I've been so blessed. In spite of my failings, I've found success. For I've known love and I've known good times, and I have known friendship and written some rhymes.
You've been listening to The Last Walk, Remember When, with your host, Ron Baumbach. And we've been doing a journey about my favorite baseball team, the New York Mets. We're coming up to the World Series 1969. My thanks to the Mets, to YouTube, Wikipedia, and to all the fans who cheered Let's Go Mets. And to, of course, Paul Cassone for the great song Here's to Good Friends heard throughout our show. And my good buddy Mike, who lived through this with me back in college in 1969, for all the great work he does in his studio in the great state of Tennessee.